I see my Phoebe Quinn, 30 years old now, and I watch how she moves with them. Those crutches that have been her shadow since the wreck shattered more than just her car. It fractured her spine. And on this day of all days, at her own father's birthday celebration, a summer barbecue in that familiar Denver backyard, the one where I taught her to walk, I had to watch as her world was violently torn apart all over again. Her own sister, my other daughter, reached out and ripped a crutch away mid-stride. Her voice a blade in the warm air screaming, "Stop faking it, Phoebe. You're just clinging to handouts," she spat, and I felt the venom I could never cure. My girl crumpled to the grass, and I felt the heat of shame scorch her face, a fire I couldn't put out, as the sound of our family, our relatives, erupted in a wave of laughter. I saw her cousins, their faces lit by screen glow, raising their phones, not to help, but to capture her fall to make a memory of her deepest humiliation. It was a spectacle for them. Their eyes, so cold and amused, delivered a wound far deeper than the unforgiving ground. I saw her look up, searching, and find her sister's glare, that same tight, suspicious squint I know so well. A look I saw blooming in the shadows of Phoebe's recovery for years. A darkness I was powerless to understand from my side of the veil. Even her best friend, the one who held her hand and counted her breaths, through every grueling therapy session, was paralyzed by the cruelty of it all, standing frozen, her hand covering her mouth as if to trap a scream. I felt Phoebe's silent plea, the desperate urge to explain the invisible war inside her body, but the jeers of the crowd were a tidal wave crashing over her, swallowing her thoughts whole. The sting of betrayal was absolute, a poison in her veins, not just from her sister, but from the chorus of those who should have been her sanctuary. Every single one of them who chose to laugh instead of help. My poor girl had weathered storms of doubt before, but nothing like this. Not here, not in the heart of her family laid bare for all to see. But what truly breaks me is knowing that in her heart she feels utterly alone. Yet I am here. I am watching. I am the one who knows the truth of her pain. And I can see the coming storm, the 6 words that are about to change everything. I watched a silent prayer on my non-existent lips for her to somehow turn this waking nightmare inside out, to leave. Everyone in that garden utterly broken by her truth. Is there any wound deeper than one carved by your own blood? I feel their judgment from here, a cold phantom blade slicing deeper than any spoken word ever could. It is a poison brewed in the heart of a home. I see it spill over my Phoebe now, and I wish I had arms to shield her. I linger in these moments, a shadow tethered to her pain, because what was about to happen would crack the very foundation of her world. The backyard was a tapestry of false peace, alive with laughter and the haze of smoky grills. I saw the children weaving between the picnic tables, their joy a fragile, beautiful sound against the low sizzle of cooking meat. And then her sister stood in the very center of that illusion, her voice a shard of ice tearing through the warm afternoon chatter. "Fee's faking her disability." The words dripped with a jealousy I knew had festered for years. "She's just trying to mooch off Mom and Dad's money," she announced, her finger pointing like a weapon aimed at my girl's heart. "I'm the one. He's stuck here caring for them while she gets to play. The victim?" The words weren't just spoken. They were hurled, and I saw Phoebe's spirit recoil. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd as heads turned, the faces of kin twisting into masks of doubt. Her own aunt raised a phone, a black mirror, to capture and preserve every second of my Phoebe's humiliation, a predator's smirk twitching on her lips. And then her cousin, Joanna, ever the echo to her sister's cruel pronouncements, let out a sharp, piercing laugh that validated the attack, urging her on. As if on cue, another cousin, Andrew, added his own drop of poison. "I saw her walking at the clinic," he declared to the silent jury. "No crutches, just holding the wall." I felt the knot of sickness tighten in her stomach. Andrew had stolen a glimpse of her private war, a moment from a therapy session where she was fighting, struggling for every inch. I watch her fight for balance. A fragile moment, suspended in time, a battle not just against gravity, but against their crushing disbelief. Her lips part, a breath of an explanation forming, and I feel the tremor in her voice, an echo of every agonizing step she took in that cold therapy room. She speaks of the accident, a wound from 2 years ago that they insist on tearing open again. Her truth is simple. She needs help to stand, but her aunt's voice cuts through it like a shard of glass, slicing her off, the words coated in a scorn so thick I can almost see it stain the air. "Don't lie to us, Phoebe." The accusation lands, and the crowd turns, a single, many-eyed beast. Their gazes are not just looks. They are tiny pins, fixing her in place while some nod in cruel agreement. The whispers slither around her, and I see my girl shrink, becoming a specimen for their morbid curiosity. Under their collective microscope, every pained breath she takes is judged as a performance. Her mother, over by the drinks, anchors her gaze to the floorboards, a study in deliberate blindness. She looks away, believing that if she doesn't see Phoebe's pain, it cannot touch her. All to preserve the fragile veneer of the family's good name, a thing more precious than her own child. Her father, a ghost in the barbecue smoke, is lost in the ritual of flipping burgers. He never even glances her way, utterly absorbed in his simple, oblivious task. His hands are busy pouring a drink for a neighbor, while my Phoebe is drowning right beside him. And oh, that silence from them. It's a wound far deeper than any shouted accusation. The girl she calls her best friend stands at her side, a perfect picture of loyalty. But I see the lie in the squeeze of her hand, the subtle shift of her phone. Its lens, a cold, unblinking eye angled perfectly to capture my Phoebe's humiliation. She fights for a steady breath, but the air is being squeezed from her lungs by the weight, the suffocating pressure of their collective distrust, a force that is pushing her completely alone. She's adrift in a sea of faces she once knew, now twisted into masks. Then her sister's voice attacks. She paces like a caged animal, her voice rising, weaponizing the past against her. She speaks of the medical bills, turning the cost of survival into a sin that drained their parents' future. She paints my poor girl as a thief, a leech who has been milking them. The vile words are spat out, hanging in the air for years. She insists her gestures wild and accusatory. A performance of righteous fury. And Joanna claps a sharp, cracking sound, celebrating the cruelty as if it were a grand finale. A perfect performance captured forever by the cold, unforgiving eye of her aunt's camera. Stayed trained on me. I wanted to scream, to make them see the truth, but my words felt trapped. Andrew doubled down, insisting she looked fine at the clinic. I swear. His certainty fueled the crowd's murmurs, and I caught a few relatives shaking their heads, their skepticism growing. I leaned on my remaining crutch, my knuckles white. The accident crushed my spine. I said louder, this time. Therapy is the only reason I can stand at all. But my plea fell flat, drowned by Joanna's snicker, and my aunt's muttered, "Sure, that's what she says." Mom's shoulders slumped further, her silence a wall between us. Dad laughed at something a guest said, oblivious to the storm brewing. My friend's grip tightened, her quiet strength, the only thing keeping me grounded. The accusations kept coming, each one sharper than the last. My sister claimed I'd been scheming since the accident, that I'd chosen crutches to guilt our parents. Her words painted me as a con artist, not a daughter fighting to regain her life. Joanna's laughter rang out again, and Andrew nodded, repeating his story about the clinic. My aunt's phone never wavered, capturing I felt it too. A phantom jolt for every flinch she made as I watched the circle of faces tighten, their judgment a tangible thing, a heavy air that stole the breath she so desperately needed. Her eyes, my sweet girl's eyes, darted through the crowd like a cornered animal searching for a single harbor in a sea of doubt, just one person who saw past the performance. But her own mother's gaze slid away, sacrificing her daughter for the fragile idol of peace. It was a quiet, devastating betrayal, choosing the comfort of the crowd over her duty as a protector. And her father? He showed her nothing but his back, flipping a burger on the grill while her world was consumed by flames. Then, a small light, her friend, leaned in to whisper, "We'll fix this," her voice a tiny defiant anchor in the storm of their disbelief. I saw Phoebe cling to the sound of those words, but the cold tide of isolation was already too high, an overwhelming wave that left her stranded and shivering in a garden full of people who were meant to be her home. Her sister's voice then rose to a fever pitch, a shrill, demanding sound, insisting she confess to a crime she never committed. The accusations ricocheted off the trees, ugly and sharp, pulling every last pair of eyes to her, pinning her down. Her mouth opened, a flicker of her old fire ready to fight back, but then a shadow detached itself from the edge of the gathering. Someone had been standing in the wings. Someone who had been truly listening, who held the key to the truth. A calm, steady presence stepped into the light, a quiet force ready to rewrite the entire ugly scene. A voice cut through the noise, clear and resolute. Dr. Stephen Brooks, her father's old friend, the man I'd trusted, and the one who knew the geography of her pain, stepped forward, and his mere presence was enough to command a sudden, breathless silence. He placed a gentle hand on her sister's shoulder, his eyes firm and kind. "She's not faking. I can prove it." His 6 simple words fell like a judge's gavel, shattering the tension into a million pieces. In the backyard, where just moments before a storm of poison had raged, a new kind of silence fell. A silence so heavy it pressed down on them all, freezing the ugly words in their throats. I watched their faces become masks of disbelief, their cruelty caught in the sudden stillness. Her aunt, the ringleader, slowly lowered her phone, the venomous smirk melting from her lips like wax. Her cousin Joanna, whose laughter had been the sharpest knife, pressed a hand to her own mouth, a futile gesture as if she could physically hold back the poison she'd so gleefully spat out. Then, Dr. Brooks, her quiet guardian, drew his own phone, each movement a deliberate, calming counterpoint to their chaos. He moved with the weight of someone who held the truth in the palm of his hand. "I record my patients' sessions." He began, his voice a steady anchor in the churning sea of their shame, "to track their progress." It was a simple explanation, but it carried the force of a judgment. "This," he said, his gaze sweeping over them, "is from Tuesday." He touched the screen, and there she was. My Phoebe. The video played a silent testament to her unseen war. I saw her in his clinic, her body wrestling with itself, her crutches the only allies in her struggle to move. I felt the ghost of that tremor in her legs, the memory of her sweat beading on her brow like tiny, hard-won jewels. Every single step she took was a mountain she had to conquer, and I had been with her for every inch. The pack of wolves leaned in their eyes, now glued to the screen, their hunger for drama replaced by a dawning horror. The truth was there, raw and undeniable, playing out in high definition. This was the pain she never spoke of, the battle she fought when no one was watching. Dr. Brooks looked up, his eyes missing nothing. "If anyone here still doubts this," he stated, his voice cutting through the silence, "I will gladly provide her complete medical records." I watched her sister's face drain of all color, the cruel confidence she wore turning to ash. I was just trying to protect our family," she whispered, the lie flimsy and pathetic. Protect them from what? From a truth that was inconvenient to her perfect world. Her voice was a fragile thread in the suffocating silence, and the excuse shattered as soon as it left her lips. No one moved. No one offered her comfort. The lie was too naked, too ugly. Her aunt shifted a small guilty movement, tucking her phone away as if hiding the weapon. Joanna's gaze fell to the ground, a flush of hot shame creeping up her neck, her guilt a visible stain. And Andrew, oh Andrew, the one who had sworn on his life that he saw her walking, just stood there, a statue of arrogance. I watched the foundation of his smug certainty crack and crumble into dust before my very eyes. A cold wave washed over the room, a collective gasp of souls realizing their own cruelty. Their cheap judgment evaporated, leaving behind the thick, choking fog of guilt. I watched my Phoebe as she stared at the screen, her own ghost staring back from the dark glass. And I felt it in her, a single shuddering intake of air after years of being held underwater. All those silent wars she waged in the dark, all the screams she swallowed, finally given a voice. But that fragile moment of truth was instantly seared by the heat of her rage. A righteous fire. I knew so well, a beautiful, terrible anger finally turned on her tormentors, at her sister, the ringleader of this vicious circus, and at my own family, who so eagerly bought a ticket, choosing the comfortable lie over my daughter's painful truth. Why did it take a stranger's authority to make them see the girl I knew? The girl I raised. I saw her friend's hand find hers, a human anchor in a sea of betrayal. The grip was a fierce promise, a silent oath of loyalty I could no longer give. They'll pay. The whisper was a blade in the quiet, sharp and full of purpose. I saw Phoebe's chin lift just a fraction, the ember of her spirit beginning to glow hot. That fire was about to become an inferno. Dr. Brooks cut the feed. His eyes swept over to them all, not as a doctor, but as a judge. Phoebe's injury, he said, his voice a hammer striking an anvil, is real. There was no room for doubt in his tone, only the cold, hard weight of fact. The damage to her spine requires relentless ongoing therapy. She has fought a battle none of you have had the decency to witness. His words weren't a diagnosis, they were a verdict, and they landed with crushing finality. In the silence that followed, I watched their masks of righteousness crack and fall away. Her aunt, who had spat such venom, now couldn't bear to meet her gaze. Her smugness had withered into a pathetic, twitching anxiety. Joanna's hand fell from her mouth, her face a blank canvas of shock. And then her sister, the architect of all this, tried to speak. Her words were broken shards of glass. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she finished, but the lie was hollow, a dead thing in the air. Then my Phoebe, my brave, broken girl, turned her eyes to her mother. A silent plea, a child's last desperate hope for the one shield that should have never failed her. but I watch her mother stand there petrified, her face a porcelain mask of exposure. It's the shame of a secret finally dragged into the light. She chose silence, always silence, to preserve the family portrait. She called it peace, but now that silence is a confession echoing louder than any scream. It feels like a final betrayal, a wound I feel deep within my own non-existent heart. And her father, by the barbecue, he just glances over his brow, creased with annoyance, not concern. The posture of a man who wishes it would all just go away. He says nothing. Of course he says nothing. Their silence was the cage they built around her. I see the memory burn behind her eyes, a stark reminder that in this fight she had always been utterly alone. But then, the memory of her friend's promise, a whispered vow of loyalty. It echoes in the space where her hope had faded, fueling the fire I see ignite in her soul. This was never about proving them wrong, not really. I can see that so clearly now. It was about justice, about reclaiming the truth they tried to bury. Then, Dr. Brooks moves toward her, a bastion of integrity. He looks at my Phoebe, and his eyes, kind but unyielding, offer the validation her own family denied her. "You don't have to stay here," he says, his voice a key turning in a lock. She gives a small sharp nod, her knuckles white around her crutch. It's no longer a sign of weakness, but a scepter of her truth. I feel the atmosphere crackle, the weight of their lies finally shifting from her shoulders onto theirs. The crowd of hypocrites parts for her, their faces a gallery of poorly concealed regret, a blur of averted gazes and profound discomfort. The truth is a sun too bright for them to look at. Her sister, the architect of this agony, extends a hand, a pitiful, trembling gesture. "P, please." She begins the name, a profanity from her lips. But my girl simply shakes her head, her voice as steady and as cool as river stone. "You've said enough." The words cut clean. The offending hand falls limp and useless. Her sister steps back, her eyes shining with tears I know are for herself, not for Phoebe. That video didn't just change the moment, it shattered the entire illusion they'd lived in. It exposed more than just one girl's monstrous cruelty. It exposed a whole family's eagerness to sacrifice one of their own for the sake of convenience. I feel her spirit lighten, as if a physical weight has been lifted from her chest. Their doubt no longer has power, but a righteous anger remains sharp and protective. It's a clean, unyielding fire now. And beside her, her truest friend remains. So close, a silent fortress of loyalty. This is what family should feel like. I can see the light of the phone screen. Her friend has documented every second of this reckoning. Phone, a small, cold rectangle of truth that she'd need for the war to come. A hush fell over them all, a blanket of stunned silence where their mockery had been just moments before. It was a chilling counterpoint to the venom they had so freely offered. I saw Dr. Brooks incline his head toward the gate, a quiet protector in the storm. His voice was a low murmur meant only for her. "Let's get you out of here." She took that first step, and I felt the solid plant of her crutch, a testament to a strength she was just rediscovering. I watched the faces of our family blur and recede, their features dissolving into the background. They were becoming ghosts to her, just as I am a ghost to them. Their judgment, a weight she had carried for so long, finally slipped from her shoulders. She was ready. Oh, my brave girl was so ready to leave this all behind. Dr. Brooks gently steered her toward his car with her friend, her true sister Naomi, right there with her. The sound of the gravel under her crutches was the sound of escape. Each crunch was a step away from that house, from that backyard filled with so much pain. I saw his hand, a steady presence that didn't touch but offered its support all the same. And there was her Naomi, her rock. I could see the fire in Naomi's eyes, a fierce protective blaze that warmed the space around Phoebe. "You don't need them," she whispered, and the words were a promise. A soft, unbreakable vow that I heard echo in Phoebe's very soul. Those words were an anchor holding her steady against the turbulent tide of their family's betrayal. Then a sound behind them, a frantic rhythm against the grass. Our sister's footsteps hurried and panicked, chasing after them. "Phoebe, wait!" she called out, and I could hear the thread of desperation woven through her voice. My girl paused, and I felt the tension in her hand as she gripped that crutch. She turned to Queen, surveying a subject she had long since dismissed. Our sister's face was a mess of color, flushed with exertion and wide-eyed with fear. "I was only trying to help Mom and Dad," she pleaded, the words tumbling out, a frantic, desperate cascade of excuses. "You know how much I've done for them." But the words were hollow, a paper-thin excuse for a betrayal so deep. It was never about helping them. It was about controlling her. I always knew that. And I watched my heart aching with pride as Phoebe finally shook her head. Despite the tempest I see raging behind her eyes. "You're wrong," she whispers, adding, "But it's not your fault." I watch her sister's mouth form a perfect circle of shock, then snap shut. Her hands, falling, to her sides, limp and defeated. My Phoebe turns, but I feel the weight of those cruel words clinging to her spirit as she moves toward the car. The pack of relatives stands like a forest of statues, suddenly silent, their predatory confidence dissolving into a shared sour discomfort. I see her Aunt Clara, her fingers wrapped tightly around her phone. The video she captured remains there, a piece of digital poison, saved as a silent promise of future pain. A few of her cousins finally look away, their faces etched with a shame that isn't theirs. And there, in the center of the wreckage they created, stand Joanna and Andrew, swallowed by the silence, their earlier furious accusations now just a faint, foul echo on the breeze. Doctor Brooks becomes her shield. Opening the car door, his face, a mask of calm over an ocean of resolve. "We'll get you checked at the hospital," he says, and I wish I could thank him. His voice is a quiet rancor in the storm. She gives a small, fragile nod, sliding into the safety of the back seat, with Naomi, a loyal shadow, settling in beside her. As the car, too, pulls away, I feel her gaze drawn back one last time to the battlefield of the backyard. Her mother, by the drink table, has her head bowed, already managing the fallout, more concerned with smoothing over a scandal than shielding my daughter. And her father, he's still by the grill sharing a joke with a Tahai neighbor, and his laughter is a jarring, brutal sound against the suffocating tension. Their silence, I feel her realize, wasn't just an oversight. It was a conscious choice, a betrayal that cuts far deeper than her sister's venomous words. The drive to the hospital is a blur, the city lights streaking past like forgotten tears. I watch the city lights of Denver bleed into streaks of color through the car window, a perfect mirror for the chaos in her soul. Beside her, Naomi leans into the quiet space between them, her voice a low, urgent hum. She speaks of Clara and the lie she tried to spin into truth, but then she offers a lifeline. "I've got my own," she whispers, patting the phone in her hand like a talisman. "Every single second of it." Those words, I feel them land inside my Phoebe, not as sound but as a spark, catching on the dry, wounded part of her spirit. A resolve she thought had been extinguished forever. I've seen them do this to her before. Her family, who chose to see weakness instead of truth, for far too long, dismissing the agony I can feel radiating from her as just some childish ploy. I ache with the injustice of it. But now, in the sterile sanctuary of the hospital, I see Dr. Brooks move with a quiet compassion, conducting a swift examination, confirming no new fractures from her fall, unaware of the profound ones she carries within. That little scoff she makes a sound of pure irony. His kindness is a foreign language compared to the cold, brittle silence of her family. I watch his gaze soften, truly seeing her for a moment. In the privacy of the exam room, she pulls out her own phone, its cold light illuminating a new path as she searches for a champion, a lawyer. At the same time, Naomi is scrolling intently, her brow etched with focus. "I know someone," she announces, her finger tapping a name that feels like a promise. "Lisa Donovan. She's fierce," Naomi adds, the word hanging in the air like a shield. "Specializes in disability rights." I watch my girl take a breath and dial the number, her hand appearing so steady, though I can feel the tremor that runs all the way to her core. When the voice answers, it is sharp, clear, and professional, a scalpel to her fear. She explains it all, the shaky video, the poison in her own sisters, accusations, and the counter-truth that Naomi had the presence of mind to secure. On the other end, Lisa listens, her questions not of doubt, but of strategy, each one more precise than the last. This is a clear case of harassment and defamation. The lawyer states, giving a name to the shadows Phoebe has lived with. "We can file a civil suit for emotional and financial damages. A price for all the tears she cried in secret." She ends the call, and I feel the decision solidify within her, heavy and real. She's finally going to fight back. This. I felt the word rise from the depths of her soul as she spoke to Naomi, her voice a blade. "I'm suing her." And in that sterile hospital room, the declaration shattered the silence. I saw Naomi nod, a fierce light of loyalty gleaming in her eyes, a mirror of my Phoebe's newfound strength. "I'll be your witness," She vowed, her hand covering Phoebe's, an anchor in the storm I could no longer calm for her. And I knew this was more than a choice. It was the first step on a path back to the dignity they had stolen from her piece by piece. Her sister's cruelty was never just a fleeting moment of rage. I watched it all. It was a sickness, a pattern allowed to fester by a family that chose blindness over truth. Her mother's desperate need to preserve a fractured peace had sown years of poisonous doubt. Her silence was the loudest betrayal, a quiet endorsement of every venomous suspicion her sister harbored, and her father's, his booming, carefree laugh, his attention always on the guests, a performance of warmth that never once reached his own daughter, was its own brand of erasure. I see the ghosts of those faces flicker in her mind's eye, the relatives, who were so quick to gather, so eager to cast their stones of judgment. Clara's video, a digital stain still undeleted, was the unholy scripture of their complicity. Joanna's chilling laughter, Andrew's tapestry of lies, oh, they all played their part in her sorrow. But Naomi's phone held the counterspell, her weapon of truth, an incorruptible record of what they tried so hard to bury. I feel her spirit shift. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This battle was for every single moment. Her truth was questioned, for every time her agony was dismissed as a fabrication, a lie. Dr. Brooks stepped back into the room, a clipboard held like a scepter of departure. "You're cleared to go," he announced, and in his gaze I saw a kindness she had been starved of. "But take it easy." I watched her thank him, her spine straightening, her resolve hardening into armor. Naomi helped her toward the car, her presence a lighthouse guiding my girl out of the endless night, a fragile flicker of light in her overwhelming darkness. As she and Naomi moved through the night, I felt it too. A change in the quiet currents of her soul, a subtle shift in the weight she carries. That wretched piece of wood had held up a mirror, reflecting the deep, ugly fractures in our family. But it also struck a spark in the tinder of her weary heart, a new fire, a need to make them finally see, to make them answer for the silence and the cruelty. Lisa's words. I hear them echo in her thoughts, not as legal jargon but as spells, harassment, defamation, damages. Oh, if only they knew the true damages. They weren't just words on a page anymore. They were a map out of the hell they'd built for her. Sabrina. She didn't just cross a line, she burned the bridge, and her parents held the match. I feel Phoebe absorbed that truth, and it's not revenge that blooms but a desperate need for reckoning. A need for them to stand in the rubble of what they broke and finally understand the true cost of their choices. I see Naomi glance at her, and in her friend's eyes is the fierce protection I can no longer give. "We've got this," Naomi whispered, her voice weaving a promise into the fabric of the night. My Phoebe nodded, and I felt her heart, once a frantic bird, find its steady, determined beat. The war was only just beginning, and so a few days drifted by. Then the ripples of her decision reached the shore. I watched them knock on Sabrina's perfectly painted door. A man named Detective Mark Peterson. He stood on her porch, a simple badge catching the light, a small, cold sun against the bright Denver sky. I listened as his calm voice questioned my other daughter, my Sabrina, about the day she tried to shatter Phoebe at the teak shop. His words gave the ugliness a name, citing the charge of attacking a disabled person, of spreading poison disguised as truth. The memory captured in Naomi's phone was no longer just a fleeting moment of pain. It was evidence, in the hands of the law, now showing every ugly detail, the venom in Sabrina's voice, the hollow ring of her accusations, the cruel chorus of the crowd's laughter. I watched Sabrina's face as Detective Peterson's voice remained unshaken, as he methodically laid out the seriousness of the world she had pulled down upon herself. Allegations, his notebook filled with the ink of my daughter's pain. Each word a testament to the storm she's weathered. Notes from our statements. My sister's heart I can no longer reach, and Naomi's face, which I see through Phoebe's eyes, was a shattered mirror of the girl I once knew. Disbelief, her fortress of self-assurance, crumbling to dust, leaving her exposed and small. By a trembling silence, a void where all her sharp words used to live. Back at my apartment, Phoebe's sanctuary, I watched her meet with a woman who held the scales of justice in her hands. Donovan, my lawyer, she'd already unleashed the first volley in this war of hearts. Lawsuit against my sister, a formal declaration that the wounds were too deep to ignore. Compensation for emotional distress, as if one could put a price on the pieces of Phoebe's soul that had been stolen. Financial losses caused by her actions, the tangible cost of a sister's venom. "The video is airtight," Lisa said, and I felt a cold certainty in the room, a ghost of a moment trapped in time. Eyes sharp behind her glasses, it proves the very thing I always feared seeing in Naomi: intent and harm. I watched Phoebe absorb the words, the weight of them pressing down on her slight shoulders, her words settling in. This was never just about avenging a wrong, about money. It was about forcing Naomi to finally look at the wreckage she had caused. Sister faced the consequences of her own darkness, a darkness she'd let fester for years. Cruelty. Lisa then charted the long, cold road ahead, each step a stone on a path of thorns. Discovery depositions, a possible court date, words that sounded like instruments of a painful but necessary surgery. Date. The future felt like a looming shadow, yet I could feel a flicker of resolve ignite within my Phoebe. Was ready to see it through, and as the sun bled across the sky that evening, my phone buzzed with a call that I knew would come, a ghost from the past reaching out. From Mom, her voice a thin, frayed thread stretched to its breaking point, pleading. Don't sue your sister, a desperate attempt to patch a ship that had already sunk. Phoebe, she said, I'm scared this will finally be the thing that tear our family apart. Her words were a familiar sting, the echo of a lifetime of avoidance. A reminder of all the times she had chosen silence, mistaking it for peace. Quiet, letting Naomi's insidious whispers grow into monsters in the dark. To avoid conflict. I watched my daughter take a breath not of air but of courage, my voice firm. Mom, you chose peace, she said, her voice clear as a bell finally. Over me for years. I can't keep letting myself be the sacrifice for a family's illusion. To swallow the lie that everything was all right. I watched her hand tremble as she ended the call, and the silence that followed was a deafening scream, a void where a mother's love should have been. Then, like an answered prayer I couldn't voice, Naomi arrived, a soft presence against the harsh quiet. She brought with her the scent of coffee and something far more vital, a love that demanded nothing in return. As steam danced between them like whispered secrets, Naomi offered a piece of her own scarred past, a time when she too was an island. She spoke of how her own blood had branded her an outcast for daring to follow her own path, for choosing a dream over their expectations, for the crime of being herself. The sting of it never truly leaves, Naomi confessed, but you find your own ground to stand on. Her gaze was a fortress, and I saw Phoebe borrow a stone from its walls. You're already standing on it, Phoebe. And in that moment I saw my love straighten her spine. Naomi's words were an anchor, pulling her back from the edge, reminding her that true strength isn't the absence of wounds, but the courage to tend to them while still in the fight. A silent thank you passed between them, and I felt the embers of her resolve glow brighter. She had already promised her voice, her truth to the court, a promise that now felt more solid. That video, a digital ghost of the truth, would be the weapon they wielded together. Then her phone screen illuminated the room with ghosts of a different kind, messages from my family. Aunt Clara, Cousin Andrew. Their names flashed, followed by the same hollow question. How are you? The words hung in the air, a sterile, flimsy bridge over a canyon of betrayal. They were questions without weight, gestures without the courage of a real apology. I felt her pain curdle into a protective numbness. She let their words die in the digital ether, refusing to give them the life of a reply. There was no space for half-truths, not anymore. Instead, she poured her everything, into the grueling ritual of physical therapy, into the deliberate, painful act of healing. I watched her push past the fire in her muscles, her focus a blade cutting through the noise. I'd never seen that look in her eyes before, not even with me. A fierce, silent determination. Every lift, every agonizing stretch was a declaration of war, a reclaiming of the flesh they had trespassed upon. It was a silent scream against the shadows that whispered she was broken. I saw Dr. Brooks witness it too, his small, respectful nod a salute to the warrior I always knew she was. And later, in the stillness of her apartment, I would stay with her, a silent guardian in the dark. I watched as in the quiet solitude of her evenings she began to build something new from the wreckage. It started with a blinking cursor. It was her secret ritual, a way to map the geography of her own heartbreak, to finally give shape and sound to the sharp, bitter sting of being an outcast, in the one place she should have called home. I saw her fingers hover over the keys. She wrote of that moment, the fall, not with the shadow of shame I feared for her, but with a terrible, piercing clarity. She saw how it had cracked open the thin veneer, exposing the brittle nature of a trust she thought was granite. I felt the oppressive weight of her mother's silence settle in the room with her, saw the ghost of her father's indifference flicker across the screen. She wrote of the crowd, their judgment as swift and thoughtless as a guillotine. The words spilled out of her, not written, but bled, raw and without armor. Each post was a single painful step out of the darkness. She never imagined a single soul would find her there in that digital confessional, but I could feel the invisible burden she'd been hauling begin to lighten, letter by letter. That blog became her vessel, a sacred space where the truth could breathe without being choked by fear. She even dared to write about the lawsuit, not with the cold facts, but as the story of a woman choosing to reclaim her own voice. I watched her chronicle the sheer exhaustion of trying to heal, celebrating the smallest victories that no one else would see, and mourning the slow, agonizing tear of the family bonds I once cherished. Each entry was like a suture, carefully closing the wounds that others had inflicted and left, gaping, and through the ether someone was listening. Naomi read her words, her comments, becoming tiny lanterns in Phoebe's long night. "You're turning pain into power," she wrote, and I saw my Phoebe read those words over and over, letting them sink into her spirit, a mantra to guide her through the fire. Meanwhile, her sister's quiet crusade pushed forward in the shadows. Peterson would call his voice a steady presence, through the phone bringing updates like fragments of light. He had spoken to the ghosts of that day, the witnesses, and their stories were finally starting to match her own. I watched them prepare. Naomi's final testimony, a ghost on the screen, and Lisa laying out papers like instruments for a delicate surgery. I see how Phoebe clings to Lisa's confidence, a lifeline in a storm I can no longer calm for her. And I see her retreat inward to the quiet room with the therapist and the stark white page of her blog. It's become her sacred right, spilling the ink, letting the poison out one word at a time. Their names flash across her screen: Clara, Andrew, ghosts from a life that feels a universe away. Even her mother's pleas dissolve into silent, meaningless pixels against the screen's glow. I can feel her silent reply echoing in the space between heartbeats, a whisper of too little and far, far too late. The fire of her rage has cooled, not extinguished, but forged into something cold and sharp like steel. From here I can see it, a stillness that has settled deep within her, a strength that doesn't need to shout. It is the profound certainty of a soul that has finally found its true north, even if the path is paved with sorrow. I know this battle isn't just for the sister she lost, it's for a part of herself she's reclaiming. It's for every whispered dismissal I ever witnessed, every shadow they cast over her light. For every doubt they planted in her soul, every truth she was forced to scream into the void, just to prove she had the right to exist. I watch as the words she writes become a mirror showing her the truth she couldn't see before. She's transmuting her private agony into a public testament, something larger than her own heart. And piece by piece I see her spirit mending the jagged edges, starting to soften. Not because they helped, but because she is finally learning to heal in spite of them. It's Naomi's courage, a flickering candle in the dark, that guides her now. That unwavering presence reminds my Phoebe that she never truly walks this path alone. A reckoning is coming, a tide of truth about to break upon the shore of their lies. And then it happens. The video ignites the digital world, a spark thrown into a field of dry grass. Naomi's face, her story, a phantom traveling at the speed of light across a million screens. I see the numbers climb, thousands upon thousands of shares, each one a voice joining the chorus. Within days, hashtags bloom like wildflowers in a scorched earth, demanding justice, demanding rights. A torrent of comments pours in, a global wave of outrage against the casual cruelty they tried to bury. The world is finally seeing the ugliness I always saw frozen in time on that screen. And I watch as Clara's world, built on such fragile foundations, begins to crumble first. The cold corporate words appear: reputational damage, a sterile phrase for a stained soul. They sever their ties, unwilling to be associated with the darkness she carried so carelessly. To be linked with a name now synonymous with that single terrible act. Her actions. The faces that once filled her days with laughter began to fade one by one. Social calendar distanced themselves, their ghosts haunting the empty spaces in her life. Their texts and calls drying up. The silence from her phone was a scream I could feel in my own non-existent bones. Online backlash was relentless, painting her not as a person, but as an idea, a cautionary tale. Her as a symbol of ignorance. They chiseled away her humanity until only a caricature remained. My Clara, her own mother, had to face the echo of her own choices. Commenters dissected her laughter from that video, replaying it like a confession. The video calling her complicity a betrayal, branding it as a mother's failure. Heartless. Her world, once so open and filled with pictures of her children, became a fortress. Once full of family photos, went dark, the digital curtains drawn against the storm. private, but the judgment seeped through the cracks, a poison in the air, she breathed, seeping into her community circles, and I watched my poor Phoebe, my daughter, carry it all. Cousin Joanna, whose voice had been one of the loudest cheers for my sister's pain, finally broke her silence. Dawn sent me a letter, her handwriting a frantic, shaky map of her guilt. Shaky. I was wrong to join in. The words bled onto the page. Wrote admitting she'd been swept up in the fever of the crowd, a willing participant. The moment. A moment that cost my other daughter so much. I hope you can forgive me. Her words were a plea, a desperate reach across a chasm of hurt. Were sincere, but I could see the wall around Phoebe's heart. It was too high to climb. Respond. The wound was still a living thing, breathing with a pain that I could feel from here. Trust once broken doesn't mend easily. It becomes a mosaic of sharp, dangerous edges. I watched Phoebe ignore every call from the reporters, those hunters of tragedy. Their voicemails piling up with requests, each one a demand for a piece of her soul. For interviews. They wanted to put her pain on display, but she refused to be a spectacle. What I wanted. Instead, I saw her retreat to the only place she felt safe. Energy into my blog, crafting posts that were shields and swords all at once. About living with a disability in a world that sees weakness before it sees strength. World quick to judge. I watched her write about the truth they had all ignored. Small victories, managing a new therapy, finding a shard of light in an endless dark. I watch her daily battles, the small agonies of physical, for those crutches and the silent wars waged, against the ghosts of her family's doubt, a truth they refused to see. Her blog became more than just her own quiet scream into the void. It transformed into an anthem for all the others who had been cast aside and unheard. And as she entered her next therapy session, I saw Dr. Brooks offer a smile that was as precious as it was infrequent. "You're stronger than ever." His voice reached her, and I felt the words land in her soul. He spoke of her balance, how it had steadied, but I knew he saw more. His validation was a sunbeam breaking through her clouds, tangible proof that her relentless focus was forging a new reality. Each of those sessions was a ceremony, a slow, painful reclamation of the body she felt had betrayed her, a beautiful, quiet rebellion against the wall of skepticism she'd been forced to endure. I could see how the strength in her limbs was a perfect mirror to the sharp, cutting clarity she found in writing every single post, honing the edge of her newfound purpose. Then, the others began to appear, drawn to her light, their comments pouring in like a healing rain. A woman whose life was a map of chronic pain wrote to thank her for giving a name to the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from having to constantly justify your own suffering. A man his world viewed from the seat of a wheelchair confessed how his own family's disbelief had cut him deeper than any physical limitation. Their words were echoes of her own heart, and I felt the profound relief wash over her, the realization that she was not an island. These nameless faces became a sanctuary, their individual threads of pain weaving into a tapestry, with hers creating something strong and beautiful. One of them called her a voice for the invisible, and I saw that phrase land and take root deep within her, becoming the fuel for a fire. Yes, I prayed. Whoa, never. Go by. I'll see the shit has deserted. Her blog's influence spread like a current, each post carried on the tide, by those who finally saw their own reflection in her words. I see them praise her, a warm light that touches her skin, and it does nothing to bridge the silent echoing canyon between her and her family. Her mother's voice on the phone, I feel it like a cold draft, still carrying that desperate plea for her sister, a blade twisting the old wound of her own place in their hearts. Her father's silence, the way his gaze skims past her to settle on his guests, is a wall of glass she has finally stopped trying to break through. Even Joanna's letter, a fragile paper olive branch, is powerless against the weight of all those years of corrosive doubt. There is no hate in her, I can feel that, only a deep, bone-weary knowledge that she cannot rebuild what they allowed to be broken. Her true purpose is blooming elsewhere now in the souls of readers who find their own voice in her story, in those quiet rooms where a therapist helps her reclaim the pieces of herself, and Naomi always her anchor to the shore. She keeps my girl from drifting away entirely. I watch her arrive, a beacon of warmth with takeout boxes and stories designed to mend the frayed edges of her spirit. You are building something real. I hear her say one night, the soft glow of a screen, illuminating the hope in my Phoebe's eyes as she reads. Naomi's faith in her is a bedrock so unlike the shifting sands of the family that failed her. She has fought her own wars, Naomi reminds her, and walked out of the smoke and ruin, not broken, but forged. Her words are a compass, always pointing my Phoebe toward her own strength. The lawsuit, that distant hum of worldly justice, continues. Lisa Donovan sends dispatches clinical and sharp. I see that Detective Mark Peterson's quiet, steady work has unearthed the ugly truths, gathering enough darkness to finally bring it into the light, and so the civil case begins to breathe. And yet, I feel it in her. That whole legal war feels like a distant echo of the real battle. Blog, which I saw transform into her sacred field of battle. For her writing was more than just a release. It was alchemy, a way to spin her truth into gold, to dismantle the cage of words her sister had built around her. I watched her type each post a single defiant flare, shot into the dark, a testament that her story, her pain, was not a phantom. The digital world, in turn, churned into a tempest that refused to be calmed. I saw Sabrina's name become a whisper. A ghost story told, to warn others against the arrogance of disbelief of judging a pain they cannot see. Clara's public face began to crack, her carefully constructed image damaged. That laugh she'd shared with Sabrina became an indelible stain she could never quite wash away. And Joanna. I felt Phoebe's weary sigh, as that letter remained a silent ghost on her desk, a conversation she would have on her own terms in her own time. For now, she wrote. I watched her move. I felt her spirit expand. Her blog became an anchor she hadn't known she needed, a conduit for turning her suffering into a bridge to others. I saw it then so clearly. She was no longer a reflection of their disbelief. Then came the day months later when I saw their paths cross at the therapy clinic. I drifted in the air, thick with the familiar rhythmic hum of machines that promised strength, a sound that had become the soundtrack to her fight. I watched her adjust her crutches, a practiced, graceful movement born from necessity, as she prepared for the session ahead. And there, her sister stood near the sterile light of the reception desk, a volunteer, badge pinned to her chest, her hair pulled back with a severity that spoke of penance. Their eyes locked across the room, and I felt the air itself hold its breath, the space between them collapsing into a single, charged point in time. She walked toward Phoebe, her steps so uncertain, her voice a fragile whisper. I'm trying to see what you go through. Through, I hear her sister say, her hand slicing through the sterile air toward the clinic. The pain, the work. The words are an offering, but they feel like stones heavy with her own guilt. They hang in the space between them, a clumsy attempt to mend a wound she doesn't understand. She expects them to be a bridge over the chasm of silence and hurt, a chasm she herself dug. I watch my Phoebe, not the girl I left, but the woman forged in this fire. Her knuckles are pale, a constellation of pressure on her crutch. That's good, she replies, her voice so carefully level it could cut glass. But it's not about you. And with that, the universe shifts. She doesn't wait for the aftershock. She pivots a slow, deliberate turn toward the promise of the therapy room. Her focus is a pinpoint of light already moving toward the burn of honest effort. She doesn't look back, she can't. The past is a weight she is learning to set down. I feel her sister's presence shrink behind her, a ghost rendered powerless with each determined step. And then there is Naomi, a quiet harbor catching up to her. I see the fierce pride in Naomi's eyes, a reflection of my own heart. You handled that perfectly, she murmurs, and the words are a balm. Her voice is pure warmth, a stark contrast to the cold apology just offered. This is real strength, the quiet kind, a whispered reminder that Phoebe doesn't need the validation of the person who broke her in order to become whole. Inside that room, I watch her push her body through the familiar agony of her routine. Each movement is a prayer, a sentence in a story of her own making. This is her resilience written in sweat and muscle, and her blog that has become her soul's true home. It's a lifeline spun from code and courage, connecting her to a world that sees her. Others who recognize the map of her journey. Their emails are like letters reaching across an impossible distance, from readers whose bodies have also become battlegrounds. People with disabilities, with illnesses that ache in unseen places, with struggles that leave no visible scars. They arrive each day, a flood of shared truth. I see the words of a young woman confessing how she hides her own condition, terrified of being judged as less than. I see the message from a veteran who says my Phoebe's posts gave him a voice to finally speak of his own wars. Her courage becomes a beacon for them. Their stories braid themselves with hers, creating a family woven not from blood, but from understanding. A beautiful, intricate web of souls who truly saw her. She wasn't adrift anymore. Not in that terrible way she was before, a ghost at her own family's table present but invisible to them. I followed her back to the quiet sanctuary of her apartment and saw the phone light up. A message from her mother. "How's your health, sweetheart?" The words were a soft melody, but the music behind them felt so far away. I watched the screen's glow paint shadows on her face. The message, a fragile bridge over a chasm of silence. Her mother hadn't dared to mention the lawsuit again, not directly, but the ghost of her disapproval from all those years still haunted the air between them. I saw her set the phone down, leaving the message to float in the digital ether. Her choice wasn't born of anger. I could feel it was a newfound clarity, a quiet strength. It was a conscious decision to guard the fragile new world she was so carefully creating. The gaping hole her family left behind no longer swallowed her whole. Her words, her readers, the light of her own resilience now filled that space. Even Dr. Brooks could see it. I watched him observe her during their sessions. "You're carrying yourself with a new kind of confidence," he remarked one afternoon as she held her balance steady and sure. His words were a mirror reflecting more than just her physical strength. They spoke of something deeper, something I had been watching bloom within her. They echoed the solid ground I saw her finally claim in her own soul. Her blog had become her forge, a sacred space where her truth could exist without question, without needing to be defended. She wrote of the clinic, never breathing her sister's name, but instead painting a picture of the relentless work of healing, of the microscopic victories that made up her days, and the world answered her. Their comments were more than words. They were a collective breath, a chorus of, I watched the screen's glow paint her face, each comment a whisper I can no longer voice, urging her to fight on. Naomi would sit with her in that sterile clinic, a warm living presence against the cold, a steady comfort in the silence. I see them later, over coffee, the steam rising between them like a shared breath, and a real smile lights up Naomi's face. Her thumb scrolls through the words my Phoebe bled onto the page. "You are unstoppable," she breathes, and the pride in her voice is a perfect aching echo of my own. It's so clear how she has stood by Phoebe through every shadow, every step from the first betrayal to the cold war of the lawsuit, never once faltering. Her faith in my girl is a reflection of the belief she now finds in strangers, a digital tribe that sees her soul. They see the warrior I always knew, not the broken thing her family tried to label her. That lawsuit, it hangs in the air around her, a constant low hum of a battle not yet won. But for her, I see it fading into the background. Lisa. Donovan's emails still arrive, sterile updates flashing across the screen, filled with words like depositions and evidence, trying to pull her back into their darkness. But she turns away, her world narrowing to the pen in her hand and the quiet room where she heals. Her words, my God, they travel. They ripple out from her small corner of the world, their reach, stretching further than even she could have imagined. I see a message. An invitation from a reader in Chicago, a call to join a chorus of other strong voices. Then another arrives, a tangible thing, an envelope in the mail. I watch her fingers tremble as they open a letter handwritten, thanking her for making a stranger hundreds of miles away finally feel seen. Each one of these connections is a spark reigniting a fire within her I feared was lost. It fuels her need to share her truth. And I see the shift then. She doesn't need her sister's hollow understanding or her mother's hesitant messages to feel complete. Her wholeness, her confidence is being forged from the inside out, built upon the bedrock of her own brave words and the hearts of those who truly hear them. Then a small, sharp sound of dismissal, a snort, the sound of chains breaking, and the clinic. That place that once held so much of her struggle is transforming into a monument to her rising, her own strength. I watched each session chisel away at the stone they'd placed on her heart, proof that she was moving beyond them, and then Sabrina's volunteering, a ghost at the feast. It did nothing to change the landscape of her pain. Her sister's attempt to reach across the chasm felt hollow, an echo arriving years too late. Gesture that couldn't mend the fracture in her soul. I felt her resolve. She held no malice for her sister, but she no longer owed her a single moment. Her mother's message glowed on the screen, a silent, unanswered plea. It was a testament to the fact that some bridges must remain ruins not from a place of spite, but from the raw instinct of survival. I saw her world refilling with light, the healing rhythm of therapy, the solace of writing the faces of her readers, and the steady warmth of Naomi. I could feel her finally believe it, she was enough. Not because of a family she was born into, but because of the fierce and beautiful path she'd carved for herself. The horizon, once a tight gray line, was finally breaking open, and I knew she was ready for the dawn. A year spun by a blur of healing and words. And then her blog, it received a community award. I watched as the Denver Disability Alliance honored the very writing born from her deepest wounds, now a beacon for others. Their citation praised its raw honesty, its profound impact. And there she was, my Phoebe, standing in that quiet auditorium, her hands wrapped around a cool glass plaque. The sheer weight of it, an anchor in the storm of her past. The applause that rose from strangers, from advocates and allies, felt like the first true warmth. She had allowed herself to feel a stark, painful contrast to the chilling silence she had always known from her own family. Her journey, which I saw etched with every dismissal, every moment of doubt they'd inflicted, had led her to this place. To a moment of recognition that was so much bigger than just her. It was a victory shared with every soul who had found a piece of their own strength reflected in her words. Later, back in the quiet safety of her apartment, her phone lit up the dark. Rang. I watched the sound slice through her quiet world, and I saw her mother's name light up the screen. The voice that came through was a ghost of what it once was, thin and grasping. I want to make things right, she began, not with an apology but a plea. Not make excuses. Every word was a carefully placed stone over a chasm of unspoken hurt. Come to a family. Take, please. We miss you. Oh, my love. I felt the phantom ache of that word family. I saw the pause, not as silence, but as a storm of memories I could almost see swirling around her. The echoes of every judgmental glance, every whispered cruelty from those gatherings. Joanna's letter had been a single flickering candle in the dark, joined by the faint lights of a few cousins who had found the courage to whisper their regret. But the rest, her sister, her aunt, Clara. Their silence was a fortress, a solid wall of indifference that she still runs into. It's an absence so profound it screams louder than any word ever could. A void where love was supposed to be. I need peace, she finally said, and I felt the strength it took for her to build those words. Not a teak filled with judgment. Her voice didn't waver, a testament to the steel she's forged around her heart. Her mother didn't fight. The sigh that traveled through the phone was a sound of surrender, heavy with defeat. Before the line went dead. And then I watched her turn not away from the pain but towards her salvation. The glow of her laptop screen, her blog, her true home. Writing has become her sanctuary, the one place where her soul can breathe, where she can fight. For others, for the rights of bodies and minds like hers, and share the truths the world so desperately tries to ignore. I saw her fingers fly across the keys, posting about the award not as a trophy to be shown off, but as a beacon, to celebrate the real family she had built from scratch, the one that had held her up when her own had let her fall. Readers, advocates, souls she'd never met but knew better than her own blood. And then the light flooded in. Their comments a tidal wave of love, each one a testament, a promise that her voice, her beautiful voice, was a force in this world. I could see the face of the teenager with cerebral palsy who wrote that Phoebe's words were the armor she wore to face the gauntlet of her classmates' stares. I could feel the pride of an older man who shared how her fire had ignited his own, pushing him to demand the dignity he deserved. A world where she could finally be seen. Their words became the kindling for a fire within her, a resolve I always knew she possessed, burning with a purity that no hollow family loyalty could ever match. I watch her now, and I see the lightness in her shoulders, the freedom of breathing air that isn't thick with expectation. It's a beautiful, aching sight. The invisible chains she wore for them, the constant crushing need to justify her own existence, they've finally rusted through and fallen away. I remember how Joanna's accusations felt like daggers in her soul, twisting with every memory. Now I see them for what they are, a faint, silvery scar that only reminds her of the healing, that hollow attempt at understanding in the clinic. I felt her guarded heart then. It didn't tempt her back, it only illuminated the path she had to walk alone. The echo of her mother's voice on the phone, the crisp paper of Joanna's letter. They were faint whispers from a shore she'd already left behind. How could they pull her back to a place that had rendered her invisible for so many years? And look at her now, stronger than she ever was with them. Not because she found it in her to forgive their trespasses, but because she finally chose her own spirit over their silence. Her physical therapy is a ritual I watch with silent reverence. Every session is a testament to quiet battle won against the past. I see the gentle nod from Dr. Brooks, who notes her physical progress, but I see what he can't, how her very soul moves with a new, unburdened grace. Her blog and her therapy sessions became her two sacred looms, intricately weaving the tattered threads of her being back into a whole cloth. The writing untangled the knots in her mind, a quiet confession to the universe. The therapy gave her the raw strength to hold the needle steady. I watched as those two anchors held her fast, pulling her through the wreckage of the family she knew into a new dawn, a life where the measure of her worth is finally her own. When she looks back, I feel her quiet contemplation, the true accounting of the cost of those suffocating bonds. The cliffside where her body broke, I felt each accusation they threw at her, each silence that followed. They were stones, heavy and sharp, but they were also the flint that sparked her fire. Watching her sever those family ties was like watching her perform surgery on her own soul, and it wasn't easy. But it was necessary for her to breathe again. I once told her that family was her fortress, that their love was the only anchor she'd ever need. Now I watch her learn a harder truth, a better one. Her strength doesn't come from them. It radiates from a place inside her I always knew was there. It's nurtured by the new tribe she has found, by the people who see her light. It's fueled by the truth she finally wears as armor. I see her spirit now unbound, not because she earned their blessing, but because she finally realized she never needed it. That award, sitting on her shelf, it's more than a symbol of what she's built. It's a testament to the silent wars she won. But her real victory is the life I see her living now, one filled with purpose, with a voice that shields others, and a truth that no longer apologizes for itself. I watch as she keeps writing, each post a deliberate step out of the shadows. Each reader who connects is another thread of light, making her world feel less vast and empty. And Naomi, always my girl's constant celebrating. Beside her, her laughter a melody that reminds Phoebe of the bonds that truly matter. The memory of that lawsuit has begun to fade, its final ruling meaning so much less than the unshakable voice she unearthed in the storm. As she looks back, I can see she understands this lesson was never just for her. It became a beacon for anyone who has ever been drowned out by doubt, made invisible, or forced to justify their own existence. Your truth is enough. I watch her type, her fingers steady. It's her final message for the year, a promise to the world. You don't need to carry the immense weight of other people's disbelief. Find your own voice, build your own sanctuary, and let go of the hands that hold you underwater. I feel a loosening in my own chest as she realizes it. Strength was never in holding the broken pieces together. It was in the courage to choose herself. That is the pulse beating at the heart of her truth, the story she has bled onto the screen. It was never about retribution, but about a rebirth, a testament to impossible resilience of the breathtaking freedom she found in the quiet finality of letting go. Her hand lowers the screen, a gentle, decisive sound in the still air. The darkness reflects a face I almost don't recognize, one free of the old shadows. Her world is finally, truly hers to create, and from here I can watch her begin.